There's some letters. All right, kia ora team. We're running on a tight schedule tonight, so I'm going to have to ask everyone to take a seat or stand at the back if you were late. Are we ready to get going? Yeah. Grand. All right. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa, e nā mana e no reo ro rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. A warm welcome and greetings to you all. My name is Kayla Kingdon-Bebb, and I'm the Chief Executive of WWF New Zealand. And today, as we mark Nature Day at COP28, I'm thrilled to welcome you here this evening for what I think is going to be a really fascinating exploration into the crucial role of nature in our climate response. We all know that we absolutely cannot solve climate change without restoring and protecting nature on a massive scale. Climate change and nature loss are twin crises. They are two sides of the same coin. Simply put, there is no pathway to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees without investing in nature. Full stop. And as you'll hear tonight, nature-based solutions are not only one of the most effective ways to mitigate and adapt to our changing climate, but they can also be some of the most cost-effective. In Aotearoa New Zealand, we're uniquely placed to lead the way in prioritizing nature-based solutions in our climate response. New Zealand is incredibly vulnerable to climate-related natural disasters, and we have some of the highest natural disaster costs in the world as a proportion of our GDP. This year alone, Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, was deluged by floods, and Cyclone Gabrielle was the second most costly natural disaster in our history. And unfortunately, we know we're only going to see more of these events at an even greater scale. And I should note, Aotearoa New Zealand also has the highest proportion of threatened species in the world, with over 4,000 of our indigenous species threatened or at risk of extinction. Aotearoa is facing a climate and a biodiversity crisis, but nature can be our biggest ally. We should be prioritizing large-scale investment into restoring the health of our forests, wetlands, and marine habitats, and leading the way in placing nature at the heart of our climate response. Tonight, you're going to take part in the global launch of an ambitious yet cost-effective initiative in Aotearoa New Zealand, which could help us address the twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, and pave the way for more investment in large nature-based solutions globally. Recloaking Papatūānuku aims to restore and enhance 2.1 million hectares of diverse indigenous forest across Aotearoa over the next decade. It's the largest nature-based solution ever proposed for Aotearoa, and it will help to weave climate and ecological resilience into our landscape for generations to come. Here to talk more about this ambitious proposal is Simon Miller, the Executive Director of Pure Advantage. Kia ora, Simon. As you may know, we will also planning to hear from the esteemed climate economist, Lord Nicholas Stern, who's going to be sharing his insights around this proposal and highlight the economic case for nature-based solutions via video address. Unfortunately, we've run into some technological difficulties, but more than one technological difficulty. But fear not, for all of you who have RSVP'd, we'll be sending you out a link so you can hear Lord Stern's address after our event tonight. I'm delighted that this evening we are also joined by New Zealand's new Minister for Climate Change, the Honourable Simon Watts. Minister, thank you for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to join us tonight. I'm sure we're all really looking forward to hearing your reflections on our new government's climate priorities and the role you see for nature-based solutions. We will then be joined by a fantastic lineup of panelists from across government, business, and the NGO sectors. And we're going to be discussing what's required to accelerate the delivery of nature-based solutions at scale and globally. On our panel, we will welcome Keith Tuffley, the Global Co-Head of the Sustainability and Corporate Transitions Group at Citi. Prior to Citi, Keith was CEO of the B Team, an NGO comprised of 24 CEOs of global companies, leading entrepreneurs and civil society leaders, and they were aiming to drive a better way of doing business. I hope I got that right, Keith. He was an active participant in the Paris Climate Agreement process and also the development of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We will also be joined by the Honourable James Shaw. You may know him. He was formerly our Minister of Climate Change for New Zealand and also, I think the best portfolio, the Associate Minister for the Environment Biodiversity. and also, importantly, the architect of New Zealand's world-leading Zero Carbon Act and our first ever emissions reduction plan and national adaptation plan. And lastly, we'll be joined on the panel by Alice Rueza, WWF's International Senior Director of Policy Influence and Engagement and a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Nature and Security. But first up this evening, it's an absolute honor to welcome Marama Royal to the stage to provide a Māori perspective on the role of nature in climate action. Marama is chair of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Trust and is also co-chair of Potaki Ahuarangi ICF Iwi Leaders Group, the climate change arm of the Iwi Chairs Forum in Aotearoa. Potaki Ahuarangi Iwi leaders have long spoken with an authoritative voice about the nexus of climate change and the role of nature, and the need to treat the twin crises at the same time and holistically. It is absolutely crucial that all solutions to the climate crisis are people-centered, led by communities, and informed by Indigenous knowledge. And I'm really delighted that we have Marama here today to share her insights on the crucial role that Indigenous knowledge, and in Aotearoa Mātauranga Māori, must play in the global response to climate change and biodiversity loss. So thank you in advance to all of this evening's speakers and panelists, and I hope you all enjoy what is going to be a jam-packed, very efficient, and deeply insightful look at how nature is our biggest asset in the global fight against climate change. Kia ora, welcome Marama.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ko te mea tuatahi, ko te whare atu nei, tēnā koe, ko te papatūnuku kei waho rā, tēnā koe. E mihi atu kia koe ki te minita o mua, James, mō tō pukumahi, mō tō whakaaro rangatira o ngā whenua, o ngā moana, o ngā taiao. Tēnā koe, mō tō mahi. E te rangatira, te minita hau o te take Ahuarangi, Simon, tēnā koe. Pai ki te kitea kia koutou, kei wanganui a mātou. E ngā rangatira, e ngā mareikura, e koe kei. E te mareikura, tēnā koe. Pai ki te kitea kia koe, ki tēnei kaupapa o te rānei. Kia ora. E ngā rangatira, e ngā mareikura o ngā haue whā o tēnei ao. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Marama Royal tōku ingoa, ko te hea wahine o Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei ki Tāmaki, ko te hea wahine o te take āhuarangi o National Iwi Chairs Forum ki Aotearoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Marama Royal, and as I said, I am the chair of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei ki Tāmaki, which is the tangata whenua that live within the Auckland central area of New Zealand, in the beautiful city of Auckland. We are the tangata whenua that has held the ahika in that area for over 180 years. And it was my tupuna Apihai Te Kāwau who actually gifted that whenua to Governor Hobson to establish the settlement of Auckland City, with a further 11,000 acres being gifted to extend that out further. So we have a real connection and a real passion about Auckland City and the whenua that it's been built on. I'm also the co-chair of National Iwi Chairs Forum for the Climate Change, which is called Pou Take Āhuarangi, which is the climate change portfolio for National Iwi Chairs. We meet 4 times a year across Aotearoa, and this Pou is one of the most important Pou because it is talking about the future of our generations that you and I are probably never ever going to meet. But it's about ensuring that they actually do have a future. And we need to do action now. I always say this, that when I look in the eyes of my 4-year-old mokopuna, who's my youngest, and I want to look through his eyes, I want him to look back at me and say, Nan, you did a great job. You did a great job. Thank you, Nan. I don't want him to look back at me and say, Nan, what the hell did you do? So, you know, I'm really passionate about having a world for him and for the children that he will bring into this world, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone. In Te Ao Māori, we actually use our taonga as our vision and as our aspirations and as our measure of success. So Papatūānuku is very important to us, as I said, as the Mother Earth, as whenua. Our mana moana is also very important, the god of the sea, which is Tangaroa. Ranginui, which is our god, the Godfather, that brings us the weather, the rain and everything else that comes with it. Of course, Tāwhiri Mātia, which is the god of wind, the god of storms. Tāne Mahuta, which is the god of forest. So we always look back to our atua as to how we can actually turn the tide on climate change. Now, as an iwi that live in the biggest city in New Zealand, we know that our carbon footprint is huge. And so we have got a climate change position statement on how we actually are going to reduce that carbon footprint in Tamaki. Because we believe that if we as an iwi can't do that, then how can we actually demonstrate to the rest of Aotearoa that we are actually serious about what we're doing? We are, as I said, we are a settled iwi in New Zealand. And one of the first things we did when we got whenua given back to us, we actually gifted it back to the people of Auckland. So the whenua I'm talking about is Bastion Point. A lot of you may know that place, but we call it Takaparawhau. So when we got that back in the first Waitangi Tribunal claim, the first thing we did was gift it back to the people of Auckland and said that it will always remain whenua rangatira, it will never be developed, and it will always be there for people who live, work and play in Auckland to be able to come and enjoy a green setting. And I know, we have a lot of visitors up there, people coming up, doing picnics, walking their dogs and flying kites and doing all sorts of things up there, which is really wonderful because it keeps the whenua alive and it puts the mauri back into the whenua when people are on it and are using it in a way that is around, kaitiaki and looking after it. We've planted it out, so we've removed a lot of the exotics that were actually planted on that whenua. We've removed them and we've actually planted it back out with native trees. And we've done that with our community, with the people of Auckland. We have planting days where they come up and they help us plant our whenua out, which is amazing. And one of the things we have suggested to our other iwi partners is that if you have got exotics, it's no good culling them straight away. You actually need them there to plant the natives underneath because they actually provide shelter to the natives in order for our natives to grow. And then once they've taken, then you can bring them, then you can bring those exotics down. And people have actually started to use that as a strategy in replanting the natives back on their whenua. One thing that we have noticed with our natives going back onto the whenua is that our Māori weta has returned to us. And that had basically been gone for many decades. We're now seeing it returned back now that our natives are coming back. A lot of our birds are coming back that we haven't seen for a long time. The tui is forever flittering around. We've seen, the pipi whārauroa flitting around in our natives as well, which is wonderful. Again, these sorts of examples of what we are trying to encourage other iwi across the motu to do, and other iwi are doing that. We're not saying that we have got the answers to everything, we're just saying this is working for us, and we're happy to share that knowledge with you and with others. Our moana is also very important to us. Back in the 1950s, where our village was down by Okahu Bay, which is down below where we currently are living, in 1952 it was burnt to the ground because it was deemed to be an eyesore by the current government at that time. And what happened with that was that that whenua was taken and we were not able to go back and live back down there any longer. However, our urupa still remains there with a lot of our loved ones in that urupa. When we had the Auckland floods this year in January, that whole whenua was underwater, was completely flooded. You couldn't actually even see the headstones in our cemetery. They were completely underwater. We realised then that this is not going to be a once-in-a-lifetime event, that this is something that's going to continually happen to us. So we had to come up with a plan on how we could actually start to reduce that type of flooding. So, Minister, I'll have your ear on this one. We've come up with a plan to actually redirect Tamaki Drive, which actually, if some of you know that area, goes right through Okahu Bay and heads back into the city. We're actually wanting to redirect that now to go around the back part of the whenua and then come out on Wātene Crescent. And what that will do will actually bring our whenua and our moana back to its natural state. And it will actually remove the impacts of any flooding, any future flooding for that. And our urupa will actually be, will remain above water. We do know that the tides are rising continuously, so we are always strategising about how we can actually minimise the impact of that on our whenua. So daylighting of streams, we've got water running underneath us continuously, so daylighting those has been a great project for us. We've actually seen our tuna come back, so our eels have come back to us, which has been a great, they have been a great source of kai for us in the past. So it's wonderful to see those being returned back as well. Also creating wetlands and making it as natural as possible, building swales so that it actually does redirect water when water does get onto the whenua is another one. Our bay has been a very important taonga to us. So Okahu Bay was our kai. That was our pātaka. That's where we got our fish from. All our kai moana came from there. When the sewage pipes were put in, obviously it killed everything in our bay. My uncle used to always joke that he was the best breaststroker because he learned how to swim like this, and that was because all the sewage was going into our water, and that was how they had to swim, was to get it out of the way. We've now had that restored. Obviously the sewage pipes are no longer there, and we've had all the moorings that were sitting in our bay for over 50 years removed. We've had a boat thing, a barge, go along with a magnet underneath, and it's picked up all the rubbish on the seabed, and when it came up off the water onto the ramps, everyone was amazed at how much rubbish was actually sitting on the seabed. And then we've just finished putting the last 60 tonne of mussels back into the bay, because as you know, mussels clean up the seabed, and they're all back on our piles. We're now seeing kahawai jumping around in our bay again, so we can now see that because of that restoration and that re-energising of our bay, we're now having our fish and our kai moana coming back in. I probably won't eat any pippies from there for the next 5 to 10 years, but hopefully after that, I might go out and grab some pippies and have a kai of those. So that's another thing that we have been doing in order to try and come up with solutions around how we can revigorate our moana, and hopefully other iwi from across the motu can use those as some good examples. We have a piece of whenua up the top which is called Paurewa. For over 50 years, it was returned to us in our last settlement. Over 50 years it was a pony club, so we had no access to it. Down the bottom in the streams was a whole beautiful bed of watercress. We couldn't get to it because the pony club had it. So when we got it back, we gave them a 3-year exit plan to leave the whenua. They took us to court because they thought that we were just going to let it go and to do nothing with it. We actually won the court case. We weren't thinking that we would, but we knew we would, but it did cost us money to defend ourselves. And what we've done with that piece of whenua now is that we've turned it into a native nursery. So we actually, from seedlings right through, and we actually giving those as a koha to the people of Auckland and saying, you come and get your natives from us and plant them wherever you want to plant them, because for us that is part of this climate change strategy. We also have a community mara, a mara garden, and we actually plant now by the maramataka. We do harvesting every Friday, where our community come in and they can actually grab the kai. No charge, they just come in and basically help themselves to kumara, corn, greens, anything that we can plant that is right for planting at that time. And of course, we can now have access to the beautiful watercress that's down in the Paurua Creek, and we bring that up as part of the harvesting so people can come and grab that as well. One of the things that we have done around, and I think it's around the biodiversity stuff, is, privet has been a real big challenge for us. For those that have whenua, privet is not a very nice weed, and it just spreads itself. We did a bit of research, and we actually adopted this young American guy who came over and worked for us. He's really, really cool horticulturalist. And what he did was he actually mulched down privet, because normally you either have to try and cut it out or you've got to burn it to try and get rid of it. And of course, burning is not good because of what it does to the atmosphere, and cutting it's just hard work. So what we do now is actually we mulch it down, and we actually grow Māori mushrooms in it, and beautiful, beautiful mushrooms that come out of it. The one that we have is called harore, which is one of the old fungi mushrooms that our tupuni used to eat. So we are really, really happy with that particular project, and we've sent that out as well to others to say, if you've got privet on your land, mulch it down and grow mushrooms. As part of our papakainga developments, we are building homes for our whānau. We are just in the middle of our second build, where we've got 30 whānau returning home as homeowners, which is really awesome. And we build kaumātua houses. We've got a kaumātua village that has 18 houses at the moment in it. And what we're doing as part of the build is we are using environmental products. We're putting solar panels on all our houses, and we're also putting in water tanks to catch the rainwater off the roofs. We don't have the land like other iwi have, where they can build single-level homes. In Auckland, we have to actually go up, because that's the only way we can maximise our whenua and allow our whānau to come home. And of course, once you start to go up, the square meterage and the cost goes up. So we have to be really innovative around how we utilise those homes. So we are doing that. We're actually just about to put an EV hub into our marae, because we want to get our whānau into out of their cars and into either using an electric bike or an electric vehicle. And as I said, we're just hoping that some of these things that we're doing will filter out to some of our other iwi, and some of the initiatives and some of the things that they're doing, which is great stuff that they are doing out across Aotearoa. The last thing that I just wanted to say is that I'm the proud godmother of the first electric tug that goes along on the Waitemata. Her name is Sparky. I did not give her that name. That was a name it was a competition that was done anyway. When I went down to bless her, I named her Tiaki, which sounds like Sparky, but Tiaki is actually is a guardian, is a kaitiaki of the sea, and so it just that meant a lot, because it was a recognition not only to Ngāti Whātua ki Tāmaki, but to the thoughtfulness and the consideration that they had around the Waitemata, which is another taonga for us. So that's really just a very small snippet of what we're doing as an iwi, but also across our Iwi Chairs Forum, which is around data sovereignty, around food sovereignty, around mana moana, all of that great stuff. I just want to leave you just with a beautiful whakatauki that I hope captures some of the stuff that we are trying to do in Te Ao Māori and across iwi. I look at our whanaunga over here from Te Arawa. I know that they're doing some amazing stuff down there, especially with the geothermal area around power. Heoi, I'll leave you with this beautiful whakatauki from home. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapapona mu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou i a tātou katoa. Hui e taeki e. May peace be widespread. May the sea glisten like greenstone. May the sun shine upon our pathways forever. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, and let us bind together and unite. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora marama, thank you so much for giving us the state of the world. According to Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, it was beautiful and very holistic framing and underscored how we need to treat these challenges as a whole from many different dimensions. Now, my job tonight was to keep to time, and I'm already totally failing at that. No judgment, was me too. But our new minister has an obligation at 7 o'clock, so I'm going to upend the schedule, sorry Simon, and invite other Simon to come and give us some remarks. Kia ora, Minister.
Well, kia ora koutou, and a very good evening. It feels like there's been a lot going on today, and yeah, we've got another session after this. But look, firstly, just want to acknowledge everyone in the room. It's great to see such a crowd here. It's great to see a few Simons as well. It's always helpful to have a few of us. Marama, I just want to acknowledge your contribution and your leadership, and I think the way in which you introduced us to this is critical, and I know that our partnership is going to continue. Kayla, your role with WWF is critical. Good to have you here, Alice, to represent the international frame. And just also the Honourable James Shaw. James has handed the baton across in New Zealand politics and climate in particular. We are unique. We do have a degree of bipartisanship in terms of the direction and the destination, and I acknowledge that handing over that baton, and I just want to also acknowledge the work that you've done over the last 6 years to lead that agenda from a New Zealand point of view, and that's acknowledged. Miles, great to have you here with Andrew from Frontiera, and reflecting that integrated leadership of large scale and a huge element of our economy as well. New Zealand has a unique national environment and native biodiversity, waters, landscapes. It's all very much intrinsically linked, I think, to our national identity. And a significant proportion of our species, as we know, can be found nowhere else in the world but in New Zealand. But we face major environmental challenges, not only from climate change, but also from a rapidly increasing and loss of biodiversity. We have one of the highest proportions of threatened species in New Zealand, native species, and more than 3/4 of our native birds, bats, and freshwater fish species are at risk of extinction. And biodiversity affects a huge aspect of our natural resources, of which they are reliant upon that. And our government, our new government, is committed to safeguarding our environment for the future generations. I think, Marama, you acknowledged that in terms of, when you're referring to your grandchildren and that, and I've got young children as well, and it's definitely an element that I consider. So among some of the initiatives of the new government is obviously a commitment to continue on the predator-free 2050 obligations. We're wanting to look at working on reducing and controlling the spread of the wilding pines, supporting the rehabilitation of wetlands, cleaning up of fresh water by improving, in particular, sediment management and reducing nutrient loss. The world is aware of the climate crisis. I think it is the reality of where we are at the moment in terms of all of those people that are gathered here in Dubai. But the increasing awareness around biodiversity is an element in which we cannot forget. And the two are interrelated critically. New Zealand is steadfast committed in regards to our Paris Agreement obligations, and we are very much focused on the challenges and the opportunities that we can see through transitioning to a low carbon environment, increasing the amount of renewable energy and actually allowing our economy to transition and making the most of those advantages. The new government that I represent represents a signal and a clear shift from the what to the how we are going to achieve that destination. That destination for us is net zero by 2050. Our focus will be on the actions required in order to accelerate achieving those outcomes, and in particular in the first 100 days around putting in place the bedrock and the foundations for doubling renewable energy by 2050. We need to tackle climate change, and we also need to reduce the biodiversity decline. And New Zealand government is very much focused with working with the global community to be able to achieve and innovate and deploy solutions at scale in order to lead us to that point. We need to be thinking differently about how we approach these aspects. We need to be working in collaboration across the levels of government, private sector, NGO sector, iwi Māori. We need to be working together in order to achieve that outcome. And I think more importantly than anything, the pace of change needs to increase. We need to acknowledge that there is a sense of urgency that is required in regards to dealing with this challenge, and we need to work alongside each of those groups that I've referred to make sure that we're getting on and achieving those outcomes. Recloaking Papatūānuku is certainly an impressive initiative, and acknowledge the work that has been done, Simon, with the team, and actually a huge number of players in New Zealand around making this. It is an exciting opportunity, and this is NGO industry led. And I think that demonstrates an opportunity for us to say, actually, not all of these things in terms of finding solutions to our problems need to be led by government. Actually, sometimes it's best if government are out of the way and just supporting the initiative. But I think this personifies a great example of leadership, and that's what we need to see more of. We need more short, medium and long-term initiatives to deliver this. And we need to make sure that the seeds we plant today are able to flourish and allow us to get to where we need to get to in the future. I will definitely discussing, and I have committed with officials to look and to start discussions with my colleague ministers in regards to this initiative over the next couple of months. We need to consider a few elements of this, particularly around New Zealand's NDC targets, and the fact that we need to work that through, and that we need to achieve this through removals, not just planting trees alone, and so that aspect needs to be worked through. The role of natives and exotic biodiversity and forestry is front of mind, and I'm working closely with the Minister of Forestry around that, and recognising the difference around sequestration opportunities as well. Large-scale public and private investment is needed, and climate finance is going to be critical to unlock that, and for New Zealand this is billions of dollars. And lastly, the interest and involvement of Māori and the Indigenous population of New Zealand is critical to our success. We must work together in order to achieve these outcomes, and this government is committed to do this. I welcome new initiatives, I welcome new ideas such as this that will help us get through our climate and biodiversity crisis. I thank Pure Advantage for your work and your leadership in putting forward Recloaking Papatūānuku for our consideration, and I look forward to exploring its potential in the future. So thank you very much. Kia kaha, stay strong.
Kia ora, Minister. Thank you very much for your remarks, and it's very encouraging to hear that you have picked up the baton and will run forth, consulting with colleagues on this really important initiative, which I'm now going to invite Simon Miller to come tell us about.
Thank you.
The clicker is yours,
Thank
Simon.
you. We've got a short, thank you, Minister. Thanks very much. And we've got a short teaser to play first. You good with that?
Our world is in crisis. Temperatures and sea levels. Our world is in crisis. Temperatures and sea levels are rising. Lands flooding. Forests collapsing. People are making impossible choices. Species endangered. Pushed to the brink of extinction. Has hope for a better tomorrow become too much to hope for? Ka ora te wai a te whenua hoki. Ka ora te tangata. When the water and land are well, the people are well. Imagine our world in balance. Misty, ancient, deeply green. Alive with birdsong and thriving biodiversity. More resilient to climate change. Made stronger by nature's cloak, with deep roots connecting the land together. Listen. Do you hear her? The forests. The lungs of our world are breathing. This is Papatūānuku, our Earth Mother flourishing. Today, old-growth forest covers just 24% of New Zealand, lost over generations because we allowed it. Across Aotearoa New Zealand, over 2 million hectares of land has the potential to be recloaked in vibrant indigenous forest, interwoven with other sustainable land uses, creating ecological resilience and an enduring carbon sink. The map to get there has been researched and modelled. It is a journey that will extend beyond our lifetimes and one that must start now, so that our mokopuna, our grandchildren, and their children's children don't have to close their eyes to imagine a better tomorrow.
Thank you. Cool. Well, thanks so much. So welcome. My name is Simon Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Pure Advantage New Zealand, an environmental NGO, backed by a group of distinguished business leaders focused on realising New Zealand's potential for an ecologically and economically thriving future. So I'm here to introduce Recloaking Papatūānuku, an ambitious environmental restoration plan at national scale that aims to restore and enhance more than 2 million hectares of Indigenous forest over the next 10 years. So that's 8% of New Zealand's land area, about twice the size of Los Angeles County, or 500 times the area of Dubai City. So achieving this would see Recloaking Papatūānuku make a significant contribution to tackling the twin interlinked climate and biodiversity crisis. What's happening there? It didn't load? All right. So Recloaking Papatūānuku recognises that enduring high integrity, co-beneficial carbon sequestration and storage is needed alongside gross reductions to draw down historic and hard to abate emissions. It's a bold proposal that can help New Zealand reduce our reliance on international carbon offsets while also restoring biodiversity and enhancing ecosystem resilience at home. It's not a substitute for urgent and deep cuts to gross emissions. The reality is that we simply need both at scale and fast. The context, of course, is climate change, and we're being impacted by increasingly frequent and severe weather events, such as cyclones causing flooding, landslips, and damage to infrastructure and communities. Sediment from extensive erosion is the primary cause of contamination in our rivers, lakes, and estuaries, with significant adverse effects on freshwater and marine species, habitats, and ecosystems. The impacts are exacerbated by New Zealand's permissive regulatory approach to rural and urban land use, made worse by extreme weather events, the result of which is plain to see here from Cyclone Gabriel on our east coast this February. It's an example of exotic forest slash left over from clearfell harvesting that washed down onto a popular beach in Gisborne, resulting in a young boy being killed by a floating log. There's a number of other ecological disasters we're facing in New Zealand. Our native species are declining, some 4,000, with a growing number at risk of extinction. Stoats introduced to manage rabbits now also kill our native birds, including our iconic kiwi. Pests and weeds are overwhelming our old-growth native forests, impacting their ability to regenerate and threatening Indigenous biodiversity. Introduced deer and other ungulates, pigs and goats have devastated many of our forest understories. While a suite of exotic plants, some 25,000 species, have been introduced, they're also increasingly our native ecosystems. Left to right, you've got ginger, banana, passion vine, and climbing asparagus. So the story of New Zealand's forests is a long one. Our native plants and animals have evolved in isolation for more than 80 million years. Examining the New Zealand biota is the closest we will get to the opportunity to study life on another planet, said Jared Diamond, naturalist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author. And prior to humans reaching our isolated lands, some 850 years ago, 80% of New Zealand was forested. But their future is perilous. Today, old-growth forest covers just 24% of the land area because of our focus on short-term economic gain, with little appreciation for the long-term consequences, nor of our interconnectedness with, dependence on, and vulnerability to the natural world. So this is northern Hawke's Bay in Te Ika a Maui, our North Island, where diverse tall forest has been cleared from steep erodible land for pastoral farming. And so this is what could happen downstream. Climate change is amplifying all of these challenges and creating new ones. Globally, major challenges are urgently needed to shift the climate trajectory towards a sustainable pathway. New Zealand's contribution to meeting this shift is failing, and our government, like others, is looking at purchasing offshore credits to meet the difference. While all options to remove CO2 need to be on the table, our focus is on native reforestation and enhancement, deployment of nature-based solutions at scale that recognise the interconnected challenges, solutions that are lower cost, proven and have the potential to deliver a whole range of other benefits. A recent scientific paper in the journal Nature provided evidence that if we allow forest to grow old in healthy ecosystems and restore degraded areas with management, they could sequester 226 gigatons of carbon, equivalent to nearly 50 years of the US emissions for 2022. Diverse New Zealand temperate rainforests are some of the most carbon rich in the world, but it's about more than just carbon. Nature-based solutions align with traditional Māori knowledge and wisdom, te ao Māori, the Māori worldview. And we think the big opportunity is to start here, with Indigenous values and knowledge as a framing for sound economics along with scientific and ecological principles to help address the climate and biodiversity issues we're all facing. An approach we also believe could be world-leading, providing solutions for us in New Zealand and to show what could also be done globally. Imagine an interwoven landscape where native forests are sustainably integrated with other land uses, a mosaic pattern of land use, a holistic approach to enhance biodiversity, sequester carbon and strengthen communities. This is some Māori-owned land in the North Island. It's used for pastoral farming. It has a high component of regenerative native forest in the background and restoration plantings down the centre. So for a nation that trades on the authenticity of its clean green credentials, we see Recloaking Papatūānuku as a critical investment in our natural infrastructure to repair and grow our natural capital. Robust modelling shows the indicative cost to restore and enhance 2.1 million hectares of Indigenous forest to be around 12 billion over 30 years. It could sequester approximately 300 million tonnes over that time, or 1,500 million, 1.5 billion by 2100. It's about 20 years of New Zealand's current annual emissions from 2021. We have a $32 per tonne program abatement cost, which is lower than the expected cost of international offsets, lower than the Treasury's modelling in the $41 to $95 range. The model is front-loaded for establishment cost and indexed for extensive animal and weed and pest control and ongoing management. And you could compare the cost of our program with New Zealand Treasury estimates for the damage from the cyclone and Auckland floods alluded to at the start of the presentation, which is in the range of $9 to $14.5 billion. And a number of local councils in those affected regions are saying those estimates are too low. Recloaking Papatūānuku provides the triple dividend of climate resilience for farmers, Māori, landowners and government who can collaborate to create a range of economic and biodiversity benefits, in doing so meeting many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, under New Zealand's first emissions reduction plan, we committed to prioritising domestic climate action. However, our current approach is to rely substantially on international carbon offsets and approach Climate Action Track as described as setting, quote, an alarming precedent for significant offset purchasing to meet an NDC. It stated that New Zealand is set to meet by far the highest proportion of its target, some 2/3 of the action required, through buying international offsets compared with any other OECD country. Instead, Recloaking Papatūānuku proposes to allocate some of the projected NDC spend on international carbon credits for domestic Indigenous reforestation and restoration. We can bend the emission path to enable New Zealand to significantly contribute to its NDCs domestically, with massive co-benefits for landscape resilience and biodiversity conservation. We're engaging with key government agencies and central government, as Minister Watts just said, businesses and stakeholders. And there's a huge opportunity for the finance sector to develop the debt instruments needed to show how the cost can be leveraged against future NDCs and ETS revenues. We also want to explore how the environmental and conservation sector might be interested in taking this model to other parts of the world. So to achieve this kind of ambition, we need national buy-in to develop a delivery model that can carry the program to a successful outcome that will be an intergenerational, enduring asset and legacy. Backed by visionary and innovative leadership and cross-party political will that transcends political cycles. And it's key to support its implementation, including funding. Practical first steps include catchment scale demonstration and coalition building with Māori and farmers to business and national government. Step 2, the program needs to be upscaled to deliver diverse native forests across New Zealand. Longer term, we create a national strategy for New Zealand to be a nature-positive country. We share our story with the world, taking our local Indigenous informed knowledge to others and showcasing how we can live at one with Papatūānuku. So we think there's a huge opportunity for New Zealand to adopt Recloaking Papatūānuku and strategically reforest and restore more than 2 million hectares of Indigenous forests over the next 10 years. We accepted the invitation to come here and partner with WWF and present at COP because it's a multi-win, high-value opportunity that addresses a range of critical and interrelated ecological challenges, synergistically, that can and should be replicated elsewhere. Recloaking Papatūānuku is also an opportunity for New Zealand to globally pioneer the implementation of a nature-based solution at the national scale and with the degree of urgency and ambition of action that Papatūānuku needs and deserves. So we're just at the beginning, and Recloaking Papatūānuku needs bold leadership to make it happen. So can we do it? Yes, we think we can. So why on this blue marble we call Earth, wouldn't we? There you go. Thank you. I'd also, just as Minister Watts alluded to, I want to thank all of the Pure Advantage trustees, Rob Morrison, our chair, Andrew Grant, in particular, Tane's Tree Trust, and a host of people that have helped put this together, Professor David Norton, Amy Spitzer, Olivia Granger, our team at PED and Whare PR. So it's been a lot of people that we've been engaging with through the course of this year to bring this to this phase. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Simon. That was awesome. I hope you're all feeling really excited about this initiative. I have something else for you to be excited about. For your patience, I know we had advertised this event as having a reception to follow, but it's COP and things go awry, including our catering in this instance. But Pure Advantage has decided to put up some money behind a bar at a place down the road. So if you hang on for what is going to be the most exciting panel discussion of COP28, Simon will buy you a drink. Hang in there, team. Now, without further ado, let's get stuck into the panel. I have been looking forward to this conversation for at least 4 weeks. And so let's just get going. We're here today to talk about the enabling conditions that are required to get large-scale transformational projects like Recloaking Papatūānuku off the ground in New Zealand and globally. And our 3 panelists are bringing us diverse perspectives today from business and investing, from government, and from civil society. So my first question is for all of them, and we'll ask them for responses in turn. So we know, and Simon highlighted to us, that the scale of investment needed to counter the climate and biodiversity crisis is immense, and the global funding gap is really significant. We also know that NBS, nature-based solutions like Recloaking Papatūānuku, are economically efficient. They have the potential to deliver at least 30% of the emissions reductions we need by 2030, and they can also offer us, especially in New Zealand, valuable protection against the economic costs of climate change while also contributing to food and water security. Nature-based solutions, it may surprise you, could also lift 1 billion people out of poverty globally and add $2.3 trillion to the global economy. But they can also be technically complex to deliver. So, to each of you, from your unique perspective, what's required to accelerate the delivery of nature-based solutions globally and at scale? Keith, we'll go to you first.
Well, firstly,
I think it's on.
hello, is it working? Yes. Well, firstly, I'm not sure how many Kiwis in the audience, but I'm very worried about standing between all of you and a beer. So the pressure's on, isn't it, to talk quickly. I first want to say thank you, Carter, for inviting me. Absolute pleasure to get the invitation. You can tell by my accent I'm not a Kiwi, but the good news is my kids are half Kiwis, and my daughter loves WWF. So to be sitting here in front of the panda at a New Zealand event is a real honour and a pleasure. So thank you. And Simon, amazing, incredible project. And don't underestimate the power of the example. I'm sure Lord Stern will say this in his video. He always talks about the power of the example, and that is true. We use this as a global bank. We use this all the time about, hey, look at this, what's happening here. Let's now scale it elsewhere in the world. So it really is very exciting, and congratulations. So look, just very quickly, I think we've got a lot to learn from the specific climate movement since 2015. What are the enabling environment for these things to accelerate and grow? So I'll just run through very quickly 6 things that we've learned from 2015, what's enabled this to really scale from a climate perspective, which we need to repeat for this work for NBS. So firstly, clearly the long-term vision and commitment that the world has. We've now got that. We've got that from Paris. We've now got it from the Kunming-Montreal Agreement. That's tick. Secondly, all the tools and the systems, the measurement, the data. We've got that, with TCFD and with Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 for climate, for CO2, etc. We've largely got that now with the TNFD framework for nature and biodiversity. Thirdly, it's the investor pressure on companies. So the group, the Climate Action 100 Plus group, which we're now replicating with the Nature 100 Plus group. So largely a tick, but it's on its way. Fourthly, it's getting it down to the level of companies to commit and to understand they're becoming net zero by 2030 or 2050 companies, same as nature positive. The problem here is we don't really have a definition yet for what a nature positive company means at that granular level, so that CEOs, boards can make a decision, a commitment, we will be net zero, or in this case, nature positive, by a certain date. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And then as a global bank, one of the critical enablers is what we call financed emissions, i.e. what we measure in terms of where we lend our money, our proportion of the emissions owned or responsible for those companies. We need to do this under the GFANS umbrella. I'm sure you've heard of GFANS, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. We need to replicate that model for nature positive. So we as a global bank, wherever we lend, can say this is the impact we're having with that lending, and we have a target then in line with, in the case of climate, 1.5 degrees, in the case of nature positive, in line with nature positive by a certain date. But there's a lot of work to be done there. And the last thing I'd like to just mention briefly is the numbers have to work. At the end of the day, unless we have profitable, financially returning projects, no matter how much of the first 5 enablers are there, we can't get the money to move. And that is a critical element that we need to really accelerate. Thanks.
Thank you. Great answer. James, what do you think?
I think it's awesome. To Keith, I actually was going to say some of the things that Keith has just said, so I try not to repeat those. But other than that first piece around around the example, so most of the large kind of carbon sequestration projects that have been talked about at this kind of scale or have been implemented at this kind of scale in developing countries rather than developed countries. This would be one of the only ones, a rewilding project of this scale in an OECD country, and that I find really exciting, because that, if you can kind of nail it, then you can export that to other OECD countries as well. But it also means that the economics of it are different, right? Because the economics of the country are different. And so this is going to sound a little kind of strange, but was it Naomi Campbell who said she never got out of bed for $20,000 or, yeah, thank you, yeah. 20 million, whatever it was. It was a very big number. It seemed a lot in the 90s. It's probably inflated away by now, but anyway, the fact that this starts with like 2 million hectares, $12 billion, that I think is actually one of the things that unlocks the money, right? Because it's big, it actually becomes a point of attraction. There are so many small projects, and yet, if you wander around the investment COP or any of the kind of big money events around here, people are talking in numbers that start with the word B, not with the letter B, not M, right? Because we know that we've got to get to G, which is gigatons, and that's going to require gigadollars. So there is something in this which says if we can, and it's one of the things that I find very attractive about this project, it says, okay, well, you set a very large number, 2 million hectares, and then you work backwards in terms of what is the financing required in order for 2 million hectares to get unlocked. And that, to me, is actually, in some ways, an easier proposition than having to kind of argue out for like 10,000 hectares or 1,000 hectares and a few $100,000 or a couple of $1 million or anything like that. And when you're trying to work out how do we, look, this isn't going to make much of a difference to our current NDC because the trees just don't grow that fast, right? So it's not going to make much difference to our 2030 target, but it could make a colossal difference to our 3rd, 4th, and 5th NDCs and beyond, right? So 2035, 2040, 2045, 2050, when those trees are grown to maturity, that could be the difference between having to buy offshore credits or not, right? And that's kind of massive for us. And if you're buying those today, if you can get the debt instrument that says that you're buying that today at $36 a tonne, knowing that the probable price of carbon in the year 2035 or 2040 is $300 a tonne, then you're making a 90% margin, right? So the people of 2040 will be delighted that we've put them in debt at $36 a tonne if the price of carbon's $300 a tonne in that time. I mean, that to me is the kind of the critical component of this. The third thing is around biodiversity credits and so on and so forth. And, like you've alluded to where things are getting to with that. And in Aotearoa New Zealand, that's a very early conversation. But that does allow you to stack the revenue early as well, right? So, because that is something that you don't have to wait 30 years for it because it has an immediate value. That's just, I mean, carbon markets are hard enough, and all you're trying to measure is gas going up or coming down. Biodiversity credits have got a lot more complicated things to worry about. But if we can kind of crack that nut, then I think that'll make a huge difference as well.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Alice, you bring us a global perspective from WWF International, and obviously as a collective, we've done a lot of thinking about this. What do you reckon?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, of course, for having me here. And it was amazing to listen to you, Mama, Mama, on your work, the work that you're doing on the ground. How amazing is that? And then, of course, to hear this restoration, the large-scale restoration project. So 4 things normally for restoration to work, and I think you've captured them very well. The first one is the science has to be right. Where are you going to do this restoration? And is it the right place? Are you going to get the right bang for your buck? Because you cannot just restore anywhere. You have to choose it wisely. And from what I heard in your presentation, you have chosen very wisely where you want to put it. The second one, of course, is that then you need to implement. You need to go down on the ground and implement. And I think some of the examples you gave, I loved your examples of the mushrooms, of the restoration. I mean, having a movement of people restoring and seeing the benefits, I mean, that's going to be amazing. The third one, which I think the previous speakers have covered, is the finance. It has to be right, the cost of restoration. I think you've talked about that. And I think the monitoring. You have to monitor this, because if it's you're doing it for a climate benefit and to reduce emissions, you need to be able to say, to have a baseline and to show that this is where we started, and at the end of the day, this is where we are. So those are normally the big 4 things when you talk about restoration that you look at. Of course, we talk about the enabling environment, strengthening the treatment of nature in domestic climate plans and strategies. And for New Zealand, it was excellent to hear this today from your minister and from others. You're already making some progress with work with nature in your country's emissions reduction plan, so that's fantastic. Today is Nature Day, and why are we having Nature Day at COP? It's because while it used to be the forgotten solution when we started out, and we used to push for the 30% of the solution, now it's becoming front and center. We're having a whole day dedicated, and I think more and more of that, and more of getting our governments in the discussions, looking to integrate the nature and the climate discussion is going to be important. And then, of course, we just published a report yesterday, WBF did, we're calling it Breaking the Silos. Again, further putting forward this message and why it's important, and really talking about, we're really pushing for a joint work stream in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change on nature, so that we have a nature and climate convergence. And we are going to be lobbying our governments to make this a strong opportunity to really strengthen this political will behind this. And of course, capacity to support this is extremely important. In Africa, we do have, where I sit and spend most of my time and where I'm from, we do also have restoration, but your scale has been an issue, as you said. And I think scale is important, as you've rightly said. So being able to have the political will behind it, the financing behind it, is going to be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Three of you seem to be in quite close agreement on some of these enabling factors. That's really interesting. We were briefly speaking about the need to address some of the barriers to nature-positive investment. And Keith, you've mentioned some of the enabling factors. You've listed 6. And James talked about leveraging against potentially future NDCs. So currently, I don't think in New Zealand that when we look at the project like Recloaking Papatūānuku, it doesn't seem like we have the instruments that we need available to us. And my question for you is, do you consider that there's appetite within the finance sector to innovate and provide new instruments that are needed to deliver the really transformational projects like this?
Yes, there is a lot of appetite for innovation in the capital markets. Just going back one step on that, is one of the developments in the last few years has been the explosion in energy transition funds, right? So what we need is just more funds who are created. That's better, sorry. More funds that are, you can't change a strategy of a fund once you've raised it. So there need to be more funds that are raised with a specific purpose. We've seen this explosion of these energy transition funds in the last 4 or 5 years. Now there must be in the order of, there's literally hundreds that just didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. So it's having the skills, the mandate, and the strategy to invest in this case, energy transition. We need to replicate that again for the sort of projects that you're talking about. The first, so to get the innovation, we need the right type of capital to be allocated to it, and the right skills to apply to it. Now, you're absolutely right, James. When it comes to the scalability of this, on the nature side, yes, the examples are, there are so many small projects, aren't there? And so I agree, one of the great attractions of this is having it at scale, which will attract the sort of capital that a city and other banks and other investors can allocate. On the other hand, you can also have, like microfinance is a good example where it's micro, but it's scalable because you're aggregating it. Or like Sun King in Africa, the Sun King solar business, which is a securitization opportunity. So again, small amounts, project by project, but very scalable because you're just replicating it and you can securitize it. So that's an example. There's plenty of appetite. We've seen things like rhino bonds and blue bonds and debt for nature swaps, etc. But they're not nearly yet scaled. But it's a real, at the end of the day, capital markets love innovation, provided it makes money. And that's the issue, it's got to make money. And one point there is we've got to recognise that a lot of these projects are a public good globally, that are not, because we're not understanding or allocating or valuing that properly, you're making a public good that's not being properly appreciated and valued and priced. And so with all this work we're doing, we're going to understand, as a few of us were debating last night, is there's a fundamental flaw in the economic system, which is it's acting against what, Simon, you're doing and others are doing. But we've just got to keep plunging forward. It's going to be a long time before we repair that issue of externalities and internalities.
Great. I'm going to pivot to James now, and to pick up on what you've just said, Keith, you've talked about a little bit about mandate, and I mentioned that in James's work as minister, you were the architect of our Zero Carbon Act, our first ever emissions reduction plan, and national adaptation plan. And of course, you're responsible for working with nature at the heart. It's one of the lenses in our first ever emissions reduction plan. So that's mandate, right? But we're not all the way there yet. So what else can government do, James, to encourage private sector investment in nature-positive climate action, including through new novel methodologies?
I mean, the critical thing here is I think government's the buyer, right? So, if you say that we've signed up as a country to a nationally determined contribution to 2030 for 150 million tonnes of reductions or removals, we know that, well, I don't know what the next NDC is going to be, but it has to be less than that, right? So, you've got these kind of stepping stones down towards net zero. So each of those targets gets tighter than the one before. If you're going to raise $12 billion to plant 2 million hectares of trees, for example, knowing that the benefit of that in sequestration terms is going to crystallize sort of sometime after 2035, 2040, 2045, then somebody has to be on the hook for paying that back, right? And there's a lot of different ways that could happen, but whether it's out of public funds or whether it's kind of through carbon markets or, however it's organised, as far as I can work out, only the government will act as that, as the kind of the convener or the intermediary in order to enable that to occur. And it can really only do that if the Treasury believes that it's a real liability. And so one of the things that needs, in my view, possibly the single most important thing that needs to happen to enable any of this to occur, whether it's Recloaking Papatūānuku or virtually any other thing that we need to do to hit not just the current NDC but all future NDCs, is for us to understand that the Paris Agreement is international law and that it flows right through into our domestic accounts. And if you can understand it as a liability, then you can convert that into a strategy and work out ways to monetize that and turn that into an asset and so on. I know I'm talking really prosaic language for what is a very poetic proposal, but ultimately that's, I think that's probably the single most important thing that can happen. And interestingly enough, and I know I'm using the New Zealand example, right? But I think that there are lessons to be learned here kind of for much of the rest of the world as well. Interestingly enough, our new finance minister, Nicola Willis, has another portfolio which is called social investment. And it's sort of built on, it's essentially a kind of an impact bond type approach to social policy. And, there are kind of different views on that, but the kind of fundamental nature of it is a sort of an actuarial approach to problem solving, which then says, that you spend money today in order to reduce a future liability or to convert that into an asset or something like that. That's actually what we're talking about here. So at one level, I don't think that this requires anything so wildly different or outside of our current realm of experience. Like it's, like you say, there are instruments in place that we could do this, but it does require us to make a decision to do it. And to me, that's the single most important thing that governments can do to enable projects like this to occur.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Simon. I like your feedback that we just need to make the decision to do it. I felt like the Honourable Simon Watts was like leaning in that direction just before he left, so Good. Let's ask him about that, everyone in the room.
It will be a cabinet decision. So.
Indeed, indeed. I'm cognizant of time, so Alice, I'm going to give you a challenge. I'm going to ask you 3 questions in one. Number 1, with respect to the sort of comments that Keith and James have made about unlocking novel forms of capital and mandate, and 1, do you agree from a global WWF perspective, given our institutional knowledge about delivering MBS at scale? Number 2, and also reflecting on Marama's framing comments at the beginning of our session tonight, I'm wondering if you can share for us your perspective on what can be said about the role of Indigenous and local communities enabling these types of projects, if not leading them. That was actually only 2 questions, so you're getting off easy.
No, thank you very much. I fully agree. I fully agree about that it's time to look at these novel ideas, whether it's debt financial swaps, whether it's blended finance, whether it's, and we really need to get our governments involved in backing them, as you're talking about, providing the guarantee. Because, for example, in Africa, one of the biggest challenges we have, we still have 25% of the world's biodiversity. We still have the Congo Basin. We still have a lot. But most of the time, private capital, what we hear from private capital is, we can't find the bankable solutions. You're too high risk. And no one is putting forward the funds to prime the pump, to reduce that. Someone needs to de-risk. Someone needs to de-risk. And I think public money can play that role. Because private capital is not set up to do that. Private capital is risk averse. So we need to get our public money to de-risk this so that we can bring private capital. And really, private capital is the only money left out there that's available, given all the challenges we've had, still trying to recover from COVID, still trying to pay our debts. I'm talking about Africa now. We definitely need our governments to step up. Yeah, we need them to step up and be guarantors. And I feel like maybe one of the challenges we have at the moment is that we don't have the level of internalization and thinking and capacity in our ministries of finance or our ministries of environment to think about how we can structure these. But we do need to get there. And WWF is doing a lot of work around greening finance and greening the financial sector. We're working with banks a lot to try and create this understanding of the nature risk so that they can have these discussions, because I think it's important. So I agree, and that's the point. The role of Indigenous people, yes, amazing. Indigenous people have lived with nature for millennia. They have the knowledge, they have the skills for us for them to how to manage. We had very good examples. And actually, the science has come out and has shown that the lands that are under management by Indigenous people actually are protecting biodiversity better than all the work that we've been doing to create protected areas and all of that. Actually, the lands are better. And I think you look no further than what we've just had. They know what they need to do. They know the things that need to happen. They know what is restoring. So I really believe that the role of Indigenous people is so important that currently I'm actually leading a whole organization-wide project on implementing the GBF through a community-led approach. And we're really pushing for empowering the local communities and Indigenous people to be engaged in the NBSAP, the revisions of the NBSAPs, to be engaged in, to get more dedicated financing flowing, to be engaged in the conservation design and all of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Kia ora. That was a great answer, Alice. I loved your commentary about blended finance as an opportunity, and also, of course, the role of Indigenous peoples, which we've seen is really paramount in the Recloaking Papatūānuku project. Okay, we're running out of time, and I'm gonna be in trouble, and there's drinks at the bar. So I'm gonna explode our agenda slightly and ask our panelists to give us a closing comment. So we've talked a little, Keith, you mentioned that one of the issues is that nature positive investing is a concept that, nature investment is what climate investment was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And there's a lot of potential in it. But one of the issues that we're grappling with is that there's no commonly placed definition of what nature positive means in this or other contexts. And of course, I should note WWF is actually leading some work on this with a consortium of other groups. So my question for all 3 of you in turn is, A, would you like to have a stab at defining nature positive investment for us? If not, why not? No, if not, you're also welcome to use a few seconds of the time to share with us any final reflections on the enabling factors needed to deliver projects like this, or the Recloaking Papatūānuku project proposal specifically. And I'm just going to go in other orders. So James, you can go first this time.
Oh, rats.
You're on your feet.
Yeah, I was just going to, it's funny because I was just about to make some notes. I wanted to pick up on that comment that Simon made about the nature of the proposal. You know, it does include some reforestation. It also includes predator control, which, you know, if you can get rid of the browsing predators, then that adds to the understory, which means that existing forests actually end up soaking up more carbon dioxide than they otherwise would. And at least in New Zealand at the moment, that's not, as an activity, that's not currently recognised because we, you know, essentially the science hasn't been completely nailed in terms of what the effect of that would be. So as an enabling factor, having a system by which that occurs would be a good one. And this is one of the great frustrations of my time as climate change minister, is that at least in our system, all the science has to be done by government, which produces an immediate bottleneck because it's underfunded. And so then we just say, well, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that, which means things like this don't happen. So one of the things I think we need to do is to throw that open, flip it on its head and turn it into an innovation system where people who go, actually, I reckon I can work out a way to, you know, sequester an additional 10 or 15% of CO2 in our old growth forests. I'm going to put up my risk capital in doing the R&D on that, and then if I can get that over the line scientifically and get it recognised and get it into the ETS and so on, then all of a sudden that means that I can get a return on that. And it means that the government, all the government needs to do is to have an eye-wateringly high scientific standard that is the threshold that you can then defend internationally when a bunch of Canadian scientists want to kick the living daylights out of our inventory. And if you can do that kind of thing, then you really are letting 1,000 indigenous flowers bloom, right? Because it means that kind of all good ideas come to the table, and people who want to have a crack at something can, and you know, things that meet the standard they pass, and things that don't meet the standard don't, and that's kind of fine, right? And so that's another kind of really important point. And the reason that I'm saying that isn't just for the sake of the fact that I know that the room is stacked with New Zealanders who might be able to do something about that, but that again, if we can sort of start thinking about those kinds of systems internationally, then you can imagine what the kind of the innovation effect of that kind of thing could be worldwide. So that would be my kind of closing pitch for things that we could do differently that would enable big projects like this to happen.
Excellent. I'm going to let Alice have the last word because the panda gets the last word at this event. So Keith, your turn.
3 quick comments. Firstly, couldn't agree with you more about the blended finance. This, in particular, this needs blended finance. But I will add one point to it, which is the role of philanthropic capital to be part of that. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than nature and biodiversity for humans, right? It is far more exciting than carbon dioxide and methane. You know, just when you think about the vision of what we can create or recreate for the planet, and so therefore, and there's a lot of capital out there that wants to go to places like this. So it's, you know, the opportunity for us to mobilise philanthropic capital with government capital to de-risk projects, to do the sort of projects that Simon, you're doing, and there's others in the room that are doing such projects themselves. So that's a very important element. Secondly, and maybe lastly, on the point on the net positive, nature positive. I mean, we know what a net zero company is now. When we first set up the very first net zero companies back in 2015, we had no idea what they meant. We just decided that we had to set them up because we had to use that as an example for countries. But now we know the measurement systems, the definitions, the whole value chain. The point about being nature positive, you've got to go the whole value chain of the company. In my case, I'm focused on companies and banks and investors, and has to add to nature, right? So it's no longer saying we're just net zero or, you know, net nature neutral. We've got to bring back nature. We've got to restore nature and biodiversity, which means companies, investors, and banks have to be adding to nature and biodiversity with the right measurement systems in place, but through the entire value chain. That's what I would put out there as the appropriate definition of nature positive, at least for the private sector.
Excellent. I think we'd probably agree with that, Alice. Do you think so?
Yes, I think we definitely agree with that. I remember, in fact, just before this meeting, I was coming from the Nature Positive Coalition meeting, and we were talking about that. That coalition, by the way, was started by WWF, but it has a lot of members, and it's growing, and it's open to others to join. And the idea is to really define what we mean by nature positive. But I agree with the points you have made, in that when we started to think about it, we said, you know, by 2020, we need to stop. We need to stop. 2020 was our baseline year. We needed to stop destroying nature. And we wanted to make sure that by 2030, we were at net zero. In other words, no more. But by 2050, we would be positive. In other words, we'd have more nature than we even had before 2020. And that made it more nature positive. So I agree with what you're saying. It's similar in that the positive means you have more than what you started with. And in terms of my closing remarks, wow, it's been a very rich discussion, right? But I think the most important thing to say, I will say, is that nature is only part. Of course, nature is only part of the solution. We know that it's 30% of the solution to climate change. We need to do that. We need to restore
Papatūānuku. Very good.
But we also need to, on the other hand, to also work on reducing, on phasing out. And that's why we're having this discussion in this particular COP, that unless we also equally reduce emissions, right, and also phase out our reliance on fossil fuels, if we do the 30% on nature, it will not be enough. So we need to also do that. And I think it's important to know, to include that it's part of the solution. And the last one really is also about to avoid actions that may lead us to maladaptation. In other words, we need to make sure that the actions we take, whether it's about tree planting, whatever we do, that we're doing them in the right places. And that's why I said earlier about the science. The science must be right. And people, that's my last one. The people are the most important part of this puzzle. The people must be better off than how they were. We cannot do anything that will destroy the lives of the people. Thank you.
Kia ora. Well, that was great. I'm not even remotely going to try to summarize this conversation because, as Alice noted, it's been incredibly rich. And I'm going to leave it to all of you in the audience to go home and reflect on all the wisdom that has been imparted to you over the last 40 minutes. And aiding you in that task will be Simon, who will lead you to our refreshments after this event. But as we close, I just want to say thank you ever so much to our panelists, Alice, James, Keith. Simon, for your excellent presentation, which I hope you all found both informative and also incredibly inspiring, because we are at the verge of, what could be a really world-leading project in New Zealand, and as our panelists noted, potentially an example for the planet. And also to Marama, who provided us some really important centering strategic framing that underscored the fact that we need to treat these types of opportunities holistically and embracing multiple viewpoints, but particularly Indigenous viewpoints. And I'll just give it a shout out to Simon Watts, even though he's not here, so it was nice of him to turn up too. And to all of you. So thank you again on behalf of Pure Advantage and WWF New Zealand, and it's been great to see all of you, and go well. Kia ora.